5 years ago, I made a video ranking the top 10 greatest samurai warriors across all periods of pre-modern Japan. Obviously, this video set out to uncover who might really be the greatest samurai warrior of all time. What I really wanted to stress was that these were not just commanders, but actual fighters themselves who we either know for a fact, or can at least very realistically assume saw a high percentage of combat throughout their military career. And while there is plenty within that video that I still stand by, as like many of my older videos, I feel it has become dated. There is information and opinions within it that I don't agree with as much today, which has then made me question if we should do an updated ranking. And while, yes, I do want to eventually redo this video in its entirety, what I think would be even more interesting would be to extend the project. What I mean by this is by making a set of videos to build a foundation. What I want to do is make videos exploring and ranking warriors from multiple periods in Japanese history. For example, a video ranking warriors from the Heian and Kamakura periods, a video ranking warriors of the Nanboku-cho, a video ranking warriors of the Sengoku period, and a video ranking warriors of the Bakumatsu. Then, using all of these names, we could then whittle them down into an updated top 10 samurai warriors, or maybe even just make it a new top 20 instead. We'll see how things pan out by the time we get there. Now, I have to admit, originally the idea was just to select 5 warriors from each of the periods, and while I will likely just stick to 5 for the rest of the rankings, as you are probably well aware, there are tons of names to look at for just the Sengoku period alone. This is the most iconic era of samurai warfare, an age which gave rise to hundreds of famous names, which is also why I chose to do this ranking first. However, with there being so many, it was incredibly difficult to just try to select 5 prominent warriors. So for this one, I decided to expand it to a full list of 10. Of course, it was still a difficult process, but I tried my best to select the warriors who I thought really deserve a spot on this list. Now, just like my original video, my criteria for choosing warriors is simple. They have to actually be warriors who saw and likely participated in combat. You will not be seeing tons of famous daimyo or other leaders and strategists on this list. So no Date Masamune, no Oda Nobunaga, no Uesugi Kenshin or Takeda Shingen, and so forth. What we want to look at are the men who we can gather would have seen the most action, either by leading soldiers into battle, slaying enemies, and perhaps even receiving wounds or dying in the process. But there is more to it than just that, as many of the figures I'm considering had to have had a larger impact on Japanese history as a whole. This means that many of these figures would have been able to bridge that gap of not just participating in tons of action, but also coming to serve as proven commanders, orchestrating or being part of multiple significant campaigns throughout their lives. And this is what will help make the ranking easier to determine. While there are a countless number of brave warriors, both recorded and unrecorded, who have come to perform exceptionally well on the battlefield, we are not trying to figure out who were simply the deadliest warriors, although there is one entry in the list who I do think may fit that title. Ultimately though, I do not think that is something anyone would be able to correctly answer. Rather, we are trying to look at who was the most significant in terms of factors ranging from the amount of combat they might have experienced, their role during key battles and campaigns, as well as the wider actions and influence they had on history. Obviously, this does get difficult in some situations, being that many stories greatly exaggerate the performance or importance of well-known warriors across various periods. So we will have to be careful when examining some of these figures who have become glorified as great heroes today. Some of you might be shocked at which warriors I selected and which I chose to leave out. And this is where I should also remind you that at the end of the day, this is all my personal opinion, based on the criteria I just stated. If you have a different view than me, I welcome you to add your voice to the comment section below. Now, with that said, there is one figure who we do need to address right away before starting. A figure who I decided to leave out of my previous ranking, if you recall. This, of course, being Miyamoto Musashi. I previously disqualified Musashi based on his minimal experience actually seeing real warfare. Musashi is not really known for his wartime valor, despite the fact that, yes, he did come to see war both in Kyushu during the Sekigahara conflict and later during the Shimabara Rebellion. However, we instead know him better for the role he played as a swordsman in the early Edo period, traveling Japan and engaging in duels while teaching and perfecting his art. Although he was still certainly a skilled warrior in terms of his actual prowess as a swordsman, he still does not quite meet the criteria I put forth earlier. He was not involved in an extensive number of military campaigns, and although he instructed others, does not appear to have led troops into battle, at least from what I've read. Because of this, once again, you will sadly not be seeing Miyamoto Musashi on this list. Yet, if you are someone who is interested in Miyamoto Musashi, you might be very excited to learn that he is going to be appearing as a warrior in the upcoming new card game, Time Rift. I'm extremely hyped and passionate about this game, as Time Rift aims to be the spiritual successor to one of my favorite card games I played when I was younger, Anachronism. Time Rift is a card game entirely based on real history, but with a unique twist, as it pits real historical warriors across time against each other in duels to see who will come out on top. In the game, you will be selecting your champion card, who is a real historical warrior, and 4 loadout cards to go with him. These are the weapons, armor, inspirations, and specials you'll be having him use. And this is where it gets even more interesting, as you can mix and match cards across various time periods and cultures to create unique synergy to defeat your opponent. For example, Miyamoto Musashi has been revealed to be one of the first champions of the initial release of Time Rift. But what if Musashi was wielding a Dane axe, wearing Roman armor, and was inspired by an Egyptian god? I know, it sounds wild, but it is so much fun to create unique and powerful combinations. In the coming weeks, I'll be putting out a video entirely devoted to discussing the game further, because like I said, this is something I am very passionate about and want to help get the word out. So, expect a more detailed dive into Time Rift in the near future. Yet for now, if you are interested in learning more about the game, I will leave links below to the game's official website and Facebook page where you can discover more. Additionally, if Time Rift sounds like something you would enjoy, I highly recommend signing up for a pre-order, which also comes with the added perks of being a VIP. This gets you access to all sorts of exclusive discounts, cards, and previews. There will also be a new Kickstarter for the game launching in the coming weeks as well. I highly recommend you check out Time Rift today. With that said, let's dive back in to examine the greatest warriors of the Sengoku Jidai. Starting off with number 10, Kani Yoshinaga, also known as Kani Saizo. Out of all the warriors on this list, Saizo might be the most obscure. He was never a great lord, though he did come to hold a modest estate. Rather, he did come to serve a number of very significant individuals. Records indicate he may have fought under a series of prominent Oda generals, before, years later, coming into the service of Fukushima Masanori. This led him to take part in many of the great campaigns which Masanori was a part of. Specifically, he supposedly distinguished himself during some of the action seen during the siege of Odawara in 1590. It doesn't appear clear if Saizo took part in the Imjin War, yet being that his lord Masanori would, it might be fair to assume he saw combat in Korea as well. Yet, the true highlight of Saizo's career would not come until 1600, when at the Battle of Sekigahara, fighting for the Eastern Army, stories say he likely racked up the highest kill count of any single warrior that day, supposedly taking up to 17 heads, which, of course, he would not be able to carry all at once, so he left bamboo leaves behind on the warriors he killed so that he knew which ones were his. Legend says that Tokugawa Ieyasu even learned of this great feat and came to nickname him as Sasa Saizo, or Bamboo Saizo. No other warrior on this list is recorded to have accomplished so many kills in a single battle. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you were to make a debate around who is the real deadliest warrior on this list, Saizo would probably be number 1. And certainly this is also an opinion held by some people in Japan today. But outside of his actual martial prowess, he did not accomplish nearly as much as the other entries in this list, so we will keep him placed at number 10. So, let's examine then who I would place at number 9, Shibata Katsuie. Katsuie was one of the most famed of Oda Nobunaga's generals and has become nicknamed as a demon or devil. He was born in Owari and came to serve one of Nobunaga's brothers in the civil wars throughout the province. It was here that he was said to have distinguished himself by slaying other prominent warriors. Eventually, as Nobunaga came to power, Katsuie joined with him. Yet, Nobunaga was supposedly still somewhat suspicious of Katsuie and held him back until later marching on Kyoto. After this point, we really start to see Katsuie become an integral commander within the Oda army. Over the following decades, he came to lead many of Nobunaga's subjugation campaigns throughout the central region and into the Hokuriku, taking part in significant clashes and sieges, supposedly even sustaining injuries in the heat of battle. He would even come to be wed to Lady Oichi, Nobunaga's sister, who had previously been married to the now dead Azai Nagamasa. Following Nobunaga's own death in 1582, Katsuie would position himself opposite to Hashiba Hideyoshi, who himself was eyeing power. Katsuie, it appears, would try to support the authority of the Oda family over Hideyoshi's own influence. The two would come to blows at the Battle of Shizugatake in 1583, and although the campaign started out well for Katsuie, in the end he would be driven back into Echizen, where he would end his life. Shibata Katsuie remains the very image of a grizzled veteran, serving an extensive career within one of the greatest regimes of the era. He appears to have quite frequently found himself within the action, and although he saw his fair share of defeats, ultimately chose to take fate into his own hands at the end. We will also be keeping things close to Katsuie for number 8. Maeda Toshiie. Toshiie, like Katsuie, was also born in Owari and came to serve the Oda. In his youth, he even became one of Nobunaga's pages, before later becoming one of Nobunaga's umamawari, horse guards. In time, his skills with a spear were on full display during the conflicts within Owari. One story even sees him being wounded by an arrow just below his eye, yet he was able to get his revenge by charging down and killing the archer. For a time, he would even come to be exiled after getting into some bad behavior and killing an entertainer's attendant. He would go on to take part in several battles, including the Battle of Okahizama, without Nobunaga's permission, each time being credited with a number of kills. Eventually, through such determination, he was allowed back into Nobunaga's service. From this point on, he would continue to take part in many of the great Oda campaigns and battles of the period, building a reputation for himself by defeating other significant warriors. Eventually, he would come to find himself in the Hokuriku alongside that of Shibata Katsuie. Yet by 1582, with Nobunaga's death, the situation would change drastically, as now the former Oda territories fractured. With Katsuie coming to oppose Hideyoshi, Toshiie was poised to do the same. Yet after Katsuie's defeat at Shizugatake, Toshiie was able to change his allegiance over to Hideyoshi and was granted land in Kaga province. He would go on to play an active role within the new Toyotomi regime in the years to come, eventually transitioning into one of the most prominent leading figures, as the Maeda domain as well would become one of the richest in the country. Toshiie would in time be named one of the Gotairo, the 5 regents or elders selected by Toyotomi Hideyoshi to watch over the nation and his son and heir Hideyori upon his death. Which, following Hideyoshi's death in 1598, Toshiie continued to act as the primary guardian to the young Hideyori, and would initially oppose the scheming of Tokugawa Ieyasu, who sought to take power. Toshiie's immense influence left some to believe that he was the only major obstacle Ieyasu had at the time. It was only after Toshiie's death in 1599 that Ieyasu ramped up efforts to seize control. Maeda Toshiie's early years were filled with battle and conflict, yet his later life was that of one of the most significant lords of the land. It is because of this great duality that he makes this list. However, now we shift focus to number 7. Ii Naomasa. Naomasa was born in Totomi province, into the prominent Ii family which had formerly served the Imagawa. Yet the rising power of the Tokugawa would soon see their grip expand throughout the Tokai, and the Ii would come to serve Ieyasu instead. Although stories indicate he may have come to see combat throughout his youth, specifically in the Tokugawa wars against the crumbling Takeda, his first major role in battle likely came during the clash at Komaki and Nakakute in 1584 between Ieyasu and Hideyoshi. By this point, Naomasa had supposedly adopted wearing red armor and led a group of red-clad warriors called the Akazone, the Red Guard, also nicknamed the Red Devils or Demons. Legend has it that the red armor was inspired by that of the famed Takeda commander Yamagata Masakage, who had done the same. In the years to come, he also saw significant action during the first siege of Ueda in 1585 and the siege of Odawara in 1590. Naomasa had proven himself to Ieyasu over the years and thus came to be considered one of his top retainers, being granted a significant domain. Finally, during the Battle of Sekigahara, he would come to play an important role. Despite the fact that he was not chosen to lead the vanguard, he would still lead his forces into the thick of the fray, and by the end of the battle, attempted to chase down the routing Shimazu forces. It was during these heated moments that he would be hit by a bullet from a Shimazu gunner, thus illustrating how close he was to the actual action, if not within the midst of it himself. Although the wound would not initially kill him, he would die 2 years later, with many believing the injury to be a large contributing factor. However, Naomasa's legacy would live on, as his son Naotaka would lead the Red Devils into battle yet again during the siege of Osaka. Through the valor of Naomasa and his sons, the legend of the Red Devils, and the continuing prominence the Ii went on to hold throughout the Edo period, no one should have any trouble recognizing Naomasa's influence as one of the greatest warriors of the late Sengoku period. But as long as we are covering frontline warriors such as Naomasa, it is also important we examine figures such as my number 6 choice, Fukushima Masanori. Born in Owari in 1561 and supposedly distantly related to Hashiba Hideyoshi, Masanori was able to use this connection to begin his military career. Masanori came to serve Hideyoshi during his western campaigns, initially seeing action at the siege of Miki in 1578, where he was able to distinguish himself as a warrior. 4 years later, in 1582, when Hideyoshi had to rush back from the west to do battle with the traitor Mitsuhide at Yamazaki, Masanori only furthered his reputation by continuing to display his skills on the battlefield, and would soon after be rewarded with a sizable territory. Later, at the Battle of Shizugatake, Masanori served within the vanguard and was credited with slaying an opposing commander. In fact, his actions in the battle would cause history to remember him as one of the famed 7 Spears of Shizugatake. By this point, he had made enough of a name for himself that Hideyoshi came to put greater faith in him as a commander. In the years to come, he would lead forces at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, the invasion of Shikoku, the conquest of Kyushu, and even the siege of Odawara. In 1592, Masanori was appointed the commander of the 5th Division during the initial invasion of Korea. And 6 years later, following the death of Hideyoshi in 1598, Masanori went on to logically take the side of Tokugawa Ieyasu. He would be part of a number of significant events leading up to the Battle of Sekigahara, and at the actual battle itself was once again selected to lead the vanguard forces. His contingent pummeled its way into that of the Western Army General Ukita Hideye and continued to keep on the pressure throughout the battle until the Western Army began to collapse after key betrayals. Masanori's military career was one of ferocity, often being seen to lead vanguard forces into the thick of many great battles throughout the height of the Sengoku period. Unfortunately, Masanori's life would not end as befitting as a career such as his should have afforded him, as he would be accused of repairing a portion of Hiroshima Castle's walls without permission from the Tokugawa shogunate, and stripped of his territory in Aki, being severely downgraded to a much smaller domain in Shinano. As we continue on though, let's now move on to the next warrior in our list, that of number 5, Tachibana Muneshige. Muneshige is often remembered as one of the greatest warriors of the West. He was born in Bungo Province, the eldest son of the Otomo vassal Takahashi Joun. His original name was that of Takahashi Munetora. In his youth, he began to make a name for himself throughout the wars in Kyushu, and by 1581 had caught the attention of another Otomo vassal, Tachibana Dosetsu. Being that Dosetsu had no sons, he managed to convince Takahashi Joun not to only allow his son Munetora to be wed to Dosetsu's daughter Ginchio, but for Dosetsu to also adopt Munetora as his own son as a means of continuing on the Tachibana. Thus, Takahashi Munetora would in time come to be known as Tachibana Muneshige. Over the next several years, he proved to be an invaluable warrior, taking part in several campaigns and distinguishing himself by leading surprise attacks on enemy positions throughout northern Kyushu. However, the situation would begin to drastically change for the Tachibana and Otomo by the later half of the decade. as the rise of the mighty Shimazu to the south began to threaten their position. Yet, despite the worsening situation around him, Muneshige mounted a bitter resistance to the Shimazu invaders, leading successful counterattacks which supposedly saw him take a number of enemy heads. By 1587, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would intervene in Kyushu, with his massive armies arriving from Honshu and Shikoku to subjugate the Shimazu. Muneshige continued to play an active role during this campaign, and later came to support the Toyotomi government, coming to win the praise of Hideyoshi himself. He would be involved at the Siege of Odawara, and later took part in the Imjin War, where he saw extensive action throughout both portions of the conflict. Later, during the Sekigahara conflict, he held true to his Toyotomi loyalties and supported the Western Army. Following the Western Army's defeat at the actual Battle of Sekigahara, Muneshige fled back to Kyushu alongside his old enemy, now ally, Shimazu Yoshihiro. They returned to a Kyushu which had too become embroiled in the wider conflict between the Eastern and Western armies, as Tokugawa loyalists sought to destroy their enemies on the island. Although Muneshige would try to resist for a time, he would eventually surrender. In the aftermath, being on the losing side, he would be stripped of his landholdings and for a time wandered the country as a ronin, staying with other lords who had come to respect him for his valor. During the siege of Osaka, he would in the end come to serve as a military advisor to Shogun Tokugawa Hidetada, and was afterwards rewarded with a sizable domain back in Kyushu. Later, he even came to assist during the Shimabara rebellion which broke out in neighboring Hizen province. All in all, Muneshige lived an incredible life, long and filled with conflict. He would in the end die in 1643 at nearly 80 years of age, one of the last great warriors of Japan's warring period. There is another name, however, that also has been called the last great hero of the Sengoku period. Let's now move on to number 4, Sanada Nobushige, more famously known today as Yukimura. It might come as a great surprise to you to see me place Nobushige here on this list, especially compared to the fact that I previously ranked him as number 1 on my original list. This is due to a couple of different factors. For one, in this ranking I am obviously taking the entire military career of an individual more into account. And while Nobushige was certainly involved in some very important battles, the simple fact is that the figures ahead of him on this list were just a part of so much more. Additionally, something I have come to learn more and more about over the years is just how over-glorified Nobushige has become. He really is the perfect image of a noble and valiant samurai, and this has allowed his story to explode over time. However, this should not take away from the fact that Nobushige was a very significant figure who still deserves recognition. Here is what we know about Nobushige. Obviously, he was the son of the great strategist Sanada Masayuki, who was able to keep the Sanada afloat by swearing and switching allegiances with a number of great powers at the time. Eventually, after the first siege of Ueda, in which the Tokugawa attempted and failed to destroy the Sanada, they would pledge themselves to Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Because of this, Nobushige was sent as a political hostage to Hideyoshi. In time, he would come to marry the daughter of Otani Yoshitsugu, and later is believed to have served in campaigns throughout the Kanto during the 1590 siege of Odawara. Later, during the Imjin War, he, his father, and older brother Nobuyuki appear to have all been stationed at Nagoya Castle in Hizen province and were in command of potentially up to 700 men. Information about Nobushige during this time appears to be sparse, so it's not entirely clear if he participated at all during the actual Imjin War or simply remained in Japan alongside the rest of his family. Later, during the Sekigahara conflict, Masayuki wisely decided to split his family's allegiance between the Eastern and Western army, with his eldest son Nobuyuki supporting the Tokugawa, while he and Nobushige supported the Toyotomi. They would come to endure yet another siege of Ueda, this time with Nobushige actively participating. It was here they successfully held off an assault by Tokugawa Hidetada, thus stalling him from taking part in the actual battle of Sekigahara. With the defeat of the Western army at the actual battle, though, Masayuki and Nobushige would be sent into exile. 14 years later, Nobushige would re-emerge in the build-up to the looming conflict at Osaka, where Tokugawa Ieyasu sought to rid himself of the Toyotomi heir Hideyori. Nobushige would join the defense of Osaka, where he came to play an important role. He would initially try to persuade the other commanders present to adopt an offensive strategy, yet when that idea failed to gain support, he would assume the defensive posture and construct the Sanada Maru, an outlying fortification along a weaker portion of Osaka's southern wall. During the winter siege, this installation proved to be a successful measure which held back the initial Tokugawa assaults. Yet, after a brief peace agreement was reached between both sides, it would later be demolished. When the conflict resumed during the summer siege, Nobushige would take a more active role in command of the Osaka army and would attempt the more offensive strategy he hoped would have been considered earlier. Yet, now met with setbacks following the end of the winter siege, the Osaka armies were no match. In the end, Nobushige led his troops valiantly, fighting bravely to the death. Stories even say he attempted to chase down and slay Tokugawa Ieyasu, perhaps even coming close to doing so before he was finally killed in the heat of battle. Based on what we know about his role during this conflict, I do believe it is a fair assessment to say that Nobushige's boldness was the greatest threat to Ieyasu at the siege of Osaka. Not only for the successful stiff resistance put forth during the winter siege, but the tenacity and bitter determination shown during the summer siege. As we know, in the years to come, Nobushige has become celebrated as the last great hero of the Sengoku period, and while certainly this has extended into over-glorification and exaggerations that not only twist his story but also turn him into potentially the greatest samurai who ever lived, one cannot say he didn't leave his mark on history as a valiant and determined military leader who fought to the death against the armies of the former shogun himself. In fact, some stories even suggest that Ieyasu may have potentially made a remark that he hoped to be able to have a drink with Nobushige in the afterlife. If true, it certainly displays the respect with which Ieyasu viewed a foe such as Sanada Nobushige. But, moving on now, let's take a look at number 3, Shimazu Yoshihiro. It is difficult to choose just one out of the 4 great Shimazu brothers, but being that I have to, it must be Yoshihiro. Yoshihiro was born in 1535 in Satsuma province, the second son of daimyo Shimazu Takahisa. The Shimazu family had endured many difficult decades throughout the early portion of the Sengoku period, but their fortunes began to change with new efforts to expand their influence during the reign of Takahisa. It was through the great command of his 4 sons, Yoshihisa, Yoshihiro, Toshihisa, and Iehisa, that the Shimazu were able to come to dominate southern Kyushu. In his younger years, Yoshihiro was seen to perhaps be a reckless yet determined fighter who not only sustained many injuries, but also took many heads in the process. After his older brother Yoshihisa took leadership of the Shimazu family in 1566, Yoshihiro continued to serve him faithfully. By the 1570s, after pushing further north into Higo and Hyuga, the Shimazu began to threaten the Otomo, with whom they had previously been peaceful. Yoshihiro had been a significant presence in the Shimazu's northward advance, scoring victories against the Ito family of Hyuga. In response, the Otomo attempted to intervene, yet were crushed in a devastating defeat by Yoshihiro and his brothers at the Battle of Mimigawa in 1578. Following this, the situation for the Otomo began to rapidly deteriorate as the Shimazu continued their push, and many local families across Kyushu switched their allegiance to support the stronger Shimazu. However, with Hideyoshi's invasion, the Shimazu would finally be driven back and defeated by 1587. In the aftermath, Yoshihisa would be made to step down as head of the family, while Yoshihiro would become the new Shimazu leader. Despite this, it is believed that Yoshihisa still maintained a tremendous amount of power within the Shimazu. They would also be allowed to maintain a significant portion of their territory in southern Kyushu, but now had to swear their own allegiance to the Toyotomi. Yoshihiro would later come to see extensive action throughout the Imjin War, leading forces both on land and at sea, where he would score Japan one of their few naval victories throughout the conflict at the Battle of Sachon. Eventually, he would take the side of the Western Army at the Battle of Sekigahara and led a small force there, including his nephew, Shimazu Toyohisa. As the battle situation rapidly began to fall apart for the Western Army, though, Yoshihiro and his remaining forces would become surrounded. It would be here that he would mount a successful breakthrough of the Eastern Army lines in order to escape the carnage. In the process, his gunners would severely injure the famed Tokugawa retainer Ii Naomasa. Yet also his nephew, Shimazu Toyohisa, would be slain. In the aftermath, Yoshihiro retreated to Kyushu and prepared to defend his domain. Being that he still held a sizable force there, it was not easy to dislodge him, and eventually peace was reached between the Shimazu and the new Tokugawa regime. Yoshihiro would retire from leadership in 1602, handing power over to his son Tadatsune, and would later come to die in 1619. Yoshihiro had lived a life of war, serving his family courageously and remaining loyal to his brothers. He came to be respected by friends and enemies alike for his conduct. Certainly, he was one of the greatest warriors of the West. Yet now we must turn to the East to examine number 2, Honda Tadakatsu. There are few warriors as legendary as the great Honda Tadakatsu. Born in Mikawa province in 1548, it is said he came to serve Tokugawa Ieyasu from a young age. Following the Battle of Okehizama, he would come to participate in many of Ieyasu's conflicts, proving himself to be a dutiful warrior. Initially, many of the Honda family had supported the local Iko sect, supporters of the Jodo Shinshu faith. Yet Tadakatsu broke from them and supported Ieyasu in his war with the Ikoiki in Mikawa. As Tadakatsu began to distinguish himself on the battlefield, Ieyasu would see fit to make him a prominent hatamoto. He would come to be a very recognizable figure, thanks to his imposing black armor, antlered kabuto, and masterwork spear, the Tanbogiri. His fame only continued to grow in the decades to come, fighting valiantly at Anegawa in 1570, then against the Takeda during Shingen's westward push, and later against Takeda Katsuyori at the Battle of Nagashino. In 1582, he was with Ieyasu the night of the Honnoji incident and was instrumental in helping Ieyasu safely return home to Mikawa during the chaos of the event. By 1584, he would come to win the praise of Hashiba Hideyoshi at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, when Tadakatsu successfully warded off the advance of the much larger enemy force. Hideyoshi astounded by the loyalty, bravery, and boldness of such an action. Years later, during the Sekigahara conflict, Tadakatsu would continue to have a significant impact, directly taking part in the Kuisegawa skirmish fought the day before the battle, and then later at the battle itself, where it was recorded his contingent fought well and took many heads. This would be the last major action Tadakatsu would see during his life, but it continued an important trend, as despite all the many battles he was a part of, all the times he put his life on the line in service of his lord, supposedly, he was never once significantly injured. In later years, this has led to his nickname as the warrior who surpassed death itself. But in truth, this is only part of his legend, as it was his great reputation in life as a dutiful and valiant warrior and a veteran of many of the most significant battles of the period that make Tadakatsu one of the greatest samurai of the age. However, there is another. One warrior who I feel surpasses all the rest. This is number 1, Kato Kiyomasa. An iconic figure who is one of, if not perhaps the most depicted warrior in traditional Japanese art, Kato Kiyomasa goes down in history as one of the most militaristic, accomplished, and brutal warriors in all of Japanese history. He was born in Owari in 1562, and like his future comrade Fukushima Masanori, was thought to be a distant cousin of Hashiba Hideyoshi's mother. Thus, through family ties, he too would find his way into military service under Hideyoshi. He would come to take part in Hideyoshi's western campaign, yet does not appear to have fully distinguished himself until the battles of Yamazaki and Shizugatake. And it would be at Shizugatake where stories say he led a vicious and horrifying advance, supposedly making a spectacle out of ordering soldiers under his command to attach the heads of defeated warriors onto branches of bamboo which were carried behind him. Through his achievements on the battlefield, he would be highly rewarded and greatly praised, later coming to also be known as one of the 7 spears of Shizugatake. A year later, he would lead troops at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, and eventually in the invasion of Kyushu, where stories indicate that he was part of some of the most intense fighting of the campaign. In the aftermath, he would be awarded half of Higo province in Kyushu. As his status continued to grow, we can begin to examine his developing views about how to properly live life as a warrior, and thus he developed a strict set of ideas or precepts about what conduct was befitting of his soldiers and what wasn't, creating guidelines on things such as how to act, how to train, what to wear, what activities were respectable for warriors such as hunting and wrestling, and what is not, such as poetry and dancing. It even appears that he believed severe punishment was necessary for any warrior under him who did not behave as he saw fit. Later, during the Imjin War, he would become one of the greatest commanders of the entire conflict. He would come to lead the 2nd Division during the initial campaign and found himself competing against other generals for glory, specifically that of his rival, Konishi Yukinaga. In time, Kiyomasa's ferocity and lust for victory would see him push so far north that he became the only Japanese commander to advance over the border into Manchuria, coming to clash briefly with the Jurchen forces there before pulling back to regroup. Yet another exploit he became famous for in Korea was that of a pastime he adopted as he took to hunting the great Siberian tigers. Following the end of the war, he separated himself from generals who he viewed as defeatists, those who had clamored for peace and for Japan to withdraw. Specifically, he was at odds with Konishi Yukinaga and Ishida Mitsunari. This was one of the largest contributing factors which saw him choose to take the side of Tokugawa Ieyasu during the Sekigahara conflict. During the course of the campaign, his efforts were focused on dislodging his opponents in Kyushu, and thus he did not partake in the actual battle of Sekigahara. Still, he was able to successfully secure all of Higo for himself by the end of the conflict. In the later build-up to the siege of Osaka, there were fears that he might intend to support the Toyotomi heir. This has led to stories that his sudden death in 1611 might have actually been an assassination carried out on the order of Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, who might have been afraid of the possibility of Kiyomasa rallying others to fight against the Tokugawa shogunate. As I've said before, if such a thing is really true, it certainly says a lot about the terror that Kiyomasa inspired, even in the former shogun himself. This is my list for the top 10 greatest warriors of the Sengoku period. As I mentioned before, what I hope to do in the future is return to make additional videos ranking warriors from other periods of Japanese history, so that we can eventually come back to make a new list of the greatest warriors in all of pre-modern Japan. Now, I'm sure you might have some disagreements about the names I chose, those I didn't, and the order I arranged them. So please leave me your thoughts down below. I would love to hear what you think and how you would rank the top 10 greatest warriors of the Sengoku period. And lastly, if you enjoy learning about warriors throughout history, then I just want to remind you to check out the upcoming new card game, Time Rift. Links to where you can learn more can be found in the description. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.